Hey guys, it's Rob here. Today, we're going over what is arguably one of my favorite ideas I've gotten to cover so far in the series. That being, what if the cabaret acts were never retired? The cabaret acts are honestly some of my favorite parts of Pizza Time Theater, with the varied acts and multiple retrofits amongst those acts. So today, we're going to see what happened if they were never retired, and even see what new animatronics could have come out of this, should they have decided to keep them as part of their brand for longer than they did. Firstly, I want to thank Cyberstar Jowls, Rayhan Safadi, and Joss Showbiz CC for requesting this idea. As usual, I won't really be doing any research for this video, going only off of what I know and what happened before the differences in the timeline start, in order to make decisions on what would have happened next. Without further ado, let's answer the question: what if the cabaret acts were never retired? In real life, cabaret acts would begin to be largely phased out starting with the 1988 remodel, and by the mid 90s would be completely wiped out of existence in stores. We know this based off a show tape from The King being produced in 1995, which was supposedly the last one made for him. I'm unsure if Dolly or any of her retrofits made it beyond the 80s, as I could not find any info on that, so I won't speak upon that. As I said before, they began to be phased out around the time the 1988 remodel came around, so let's start there. Instead of beginning to remove them around this time, they would keep them in, having plans to use a concept which would materialize in 1989, with a design that would be used in Showbiz Pizza stores specifically. While the idea of concept unification would be identical in execution to how it was in real life, the Billy Bob animatronic would not go unused for spare parts. Instead, it would be retrofitted into a cabaret act character, the King specifically. If you're confused on how this would be done with the way Billy Bob's mech is designed, this type of thing has actually been done before for a character that wasn't shaped similarly. Major Magics retrofitted a Billy Bob into their guitarist, Barbara's string band, by modifying the mech so that it would be taller and have a proper neck. A similar thing would be done here in order to turn Billy Bob into the King, and while it wouldn't stand as tall as the massive 9-foot tall Cyberamic King, it would still probably be close to 6 feet tall. As for showtape audio, I imagine it would be the same as what we got in real life, opting out of Elvis songs and playing Chuck E. Cheese originals. These animatronics would be relocated into the sports room, which would now become the new cabaret room. In 1989, this idea would be debuted alongside the CEC3 stage. Between 1990 and 1992, the vast majority of Showbiz Pizza Place locations would receive concept unification, and alongside that would also receive the new cabaret package with a CU version of the King. Meanwhile, the same companies which were producing new Cyberamics/parts for them would also be making new King Cyberamics for 1 and 2 stage locations, going into another corner of the showroom in some cases rather than a cabaret room, as it would often be too expensive to add the room. These would be the same as the ones that came before, just being newer bots. These would also be produced for locations that didn't have the King, and instead another cabaret act, as they would be replaced by him. He would perform during breaks so as not to interrupt the main act. By the mid 90s, all other cabaret acts would be entirely phased out, being replaced with the King. Things would remain the same for a couple of years until a new concept came along: Studio C. While the concept would remain largely the same, a new concept would be added onto it. Seeing as the original Studio C concept was meant to be like a studio setup, a cameraman would be added to the other side of the room parallel to Chuck, that being the King. He would be a separate animatronic that had his own platform, which was located on the other side of Chuck's stage, where he would be standing and using a large studio camera to record Chuck. He would also ditch the white suit that he previously wore in favor of a blue dress suit. During performances, he would also play a guitar which hung around his neck. During breaks, he would also encourage the kids to try out the activities that were located beside Chuck's stage, which also included a camera, ironically enough. This animatronic would be produced by Garner Holt, the same company that produced Chuck, and would have a similar amount of movements to Chuck himself, especially when combining the movements in his large camera. This concept, alongside Studio C, would debut in late 1997 and would continue to be installed in locations throughout the rest of the 90s. As for the other stores, the King would only be represented by the screens in the main show tapes, and new material for the cabaret versions would continue to be created, with some versions opting to put him in his new dress suit design. The 2000s would see the introduction of a new stage type, that being the Studio C beta stage. This was a cutback version of the previous stage that removed some of the interactivity the alpha stage had. Now only a camera with a blue screen would remain as the sole activity, and the King would remain for a little while longer throughout these installations. Beginning in 2003, 16 Movement Chuck bots would be installed into stores, discontinuing the production of the 32 Movement Chucks. This would also see the discontinuation of the King in these stores, leaving only Chuck's stage. This continued with the introduction of the Kappa stage as well. While the Cabaret bots were still programmed and given new material, this officially marked the end of the production of any new bots, as well as their incorporation into new stores, with the only exceptions being some stores which would receive them from closed stores. For the most part, though, they were no longer being introduced into new stores, and things would continue this way for the rest of the decade. Throughout the early 2010s, the introduction of Rockstar Chuck would not initially affect the Cabaret acts. Starting in 2015, however, that changed. As showtape material changed, so did the inclusion of the King. He was no longer included in this new material, and exclusive programming for him in all forms stopped, now being programmed as a backup singer for the main act. While the King would see an occasional appearance in show tapes and be programmed properly in those instances, he often remained a backup singer that didn't appear on material anymore. This would also begin to see the removal of the King bots in all forms, as he was no longer seen as needed in locations and just an extra animatronic to have to take care of. Beginning in 2017, the 2.0 remodel would begin to be rolled out to locations, replacing animatronics with a dance floor. King would start to be quietly removed from many locations during this time, ahead of the main act of animatronics, as again, he was just an extra expense at this point that rarely did anything anymore other than be programmed to do backup vocals. I imagine at this point, in 2024, the King would be a very rare sight, only being in a handful of locations at this point, since he was an extra rather than a main act. While it would be unfortunate to see the Cabaret Act fade as a concept nowadays, it ultimately did not fit in anymore to the company's plans, especially since the main act of animatronics was being removed as well. What I can say though is that this timeline would certainly have been more interesting to live in, with Cabaret acts living on for so long, even if in the present day it would be a rare sight to see. Thank you guys for watching this video. It was interesting trying to incorporate Cabaret acts into Chuck E. Cheese past the 90s, and I had a fun time doing so. My next video will be going over Silver Springs, Maryland, which had a unique attribute to it that didn't last for very long. If you're interested in seeing that, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you're notified when that drops. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video.